At 200,000 years ago, between ice and warmth, 200,000 years ago, Earth is stuck midway through a long, cold cycle. Not at the absolute peak of an ice age, but nowhere near as mild as today. Think of the planet as wearing big, permanent ice helmets at the poles. In the far north and south, thick ice sheets sit on land like frozen skyscrapers, spreading outward in slow motion. Between those frozen caps, climate belts are squeezed and stretched into weird shapes. Sea level is much lower. So much water is locked up in ice that coastlines are pushed far out from where we know them. What are now shallow continental shelves are dry land, extra plains, wider estuaries, and land bridges tying regions together. If you could look at a map from orbit, you'd notice thicker land between Asia and Indonesia, a broader platform around Britain and northwest Europe, and chunkier coastlines along the Americas. But the Americas themselves are still fully wild, no human footprint yet. It's a world of giant mammals, big predators, and empty skies as far as people are concerned. In the Northern Hemisphere, the mood leans cold. North America carries large ice masses in Canada and around mountain ranges, with permafrost and tundra, reaching far south of where they sit now. Europe's north is dominated by ice and frozen ground, with open, windswept steppe and tundra in front of the glaciers. Farther south in Europe, things soften into chilly forests, scrub, and mixed grasslands. Here, Neanderthals are at home, hunting large herbivores in rocky valleys, caves, and wooded slopes. They've already been around for a while and are tuned to this seesaw world of cold and less cold. Africa tells a different story. It's not a simple, hot continent. It's a patchwork that keeps rearranging. Savannas, woodlands, forests, and deserts pulse back and forth as rainfall patterns shift. In East Africa, long rift valleys hold lakes that swell in wetter phases and shrink in drier ones. Around these lakes, early Homo sapiens are beginning to appear, along with other archaic humans. They're living through constant experiments, new tools, new ways of using water, new paths across the land. North of them, the Sahara is in one of its on-again, off-again phases. Sometimes it leans toward open, dry steppe and desert. Other times, rains push in, creating rivers and green corridors that allow animals, and sometimes humans, to move between Africa and Eurasia. Across Asia, it's a tale of extremes. Central and northern regions support cold steppes and sparse forests, crowded with mammoths, woolly rhinos, wild horses, and other Ice Age grazers. In the south and east, monsoon systems, forests, and river valleys create wetter, richer pockets, where different human groups, including mysterious Denisovans, may be scattered. Australia and New Guinea, fused into the greater landmass we call Sahul, are still without humans at this point. They're ruled by giant marsupials, thunderbirds, and the marsupial lion, an entire separate evolutionary experiment untouched by hominin hunters. Oceans and distance have kept this stage isolated, for now. The atmosphere is cooler, especially at high latitudes, and dustier in many regions. Wind picks up fine particles from dry plains and glacial outwash, dropping them as thick loess, deposits downwind. Skies can be hazy, sunsets redder, and the seasonal contrast between wet and dry, cold and warm, sharper in many places. Day to day, for every living thing, this is the real world, not the past. A world where giant animal tracks crisscross open ground, where ice sits on the horizon in some directions and storms roll off the oceans in others. And scattered across this stage are different kinds of humans, each tuned to their own piece of the puzzle. To understand why Earth looks like this, you can't just describe the scenery. You have to understand the mood swings behind it, the slow cosmic rhythms that keep flipping the planet between deep freeze and short warm breaks, again and again. The planet's mood swings, glacial interglacial whiplash. Earth doesn't just happen to be cold at 200,000 years ago. It's riding a set of slow, predictable cosmic habits that act like giant climate dials. There are three big dials: First, Earth's orbit stretches and relaxes over tens of thousands of years, sometimes more circular, sometimes more oval. Second, the tilt of Earth's axis wobbles, changing how strong seasons are. Third, the direction the axis points slowly drifts, changing when in the year each hemisphere leans toward the Sun. These are called orbital cycles, but you can think of them as the planet's rhythm section. They decide how much sunlight hits different parts of Earth during summer and winter. And for ice sheets, summer is everything. If northern summers are weak, cooler, with less intense sunlight, snow that falls in winter doesn't melt fully. Layer by layer, year by year, snow turns to ice, and ice sheets grow. If summers are strong, the opposite happens. Ice melts back, glaciers retreat, and the planet relaxes a bit. Over the last million years or so, these rhythms have tended to lock into roughly 100,000-year cycles, long stretches of glacial conditions, with big ice sheets and low sea levels. Then, by comparison, short interglacial vacations, where ice shrinks and climates warm, like the Holocene we live in now. 200,000 years ago, Earth is midway through one of these big cycles. It's in a cooler, glacial-leaning state, but not at the most brutal peak. Think of it as a long, drawn-out cold chapter, with brief, milder paragraphs written inside it. Climate doesn't just glide smoothly between cold and warm. It jerks. Ice cores from Antarctica and later Greenland show sudden jumps and dips in temperature. Some of these happen over just a few decades, well within the lifespan of a human or a family line. What causes those sharp moves? Part of it is how ice, oceans, and atmosphere talk to each other. As ice sheets grow, they reflect more sunlight, keeping things cooler. As sea ice spreads, it changes where heat can escape from the ocean. As oceans reorganize, they store and release heat differently, shifting wind belts and storm tracks. Greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane track along with these changes. When climates cool, parts of the ocean and biosphere lock more of these gases away, making the air thinner in them and amplifying the chill. When climates warm, gases are released back out, adding extra heat and helping tip the system the other way. From a human point of view, this big, slow dance looks like a background pattern, but its local effects are brutal. A valley that's habitable in one phase can be under ice or too dry in another. A migration route that works during a wetter, warmer pulse may become a death trap in drier, colder times. Crucially, these climate swings are not synced neatly with human plans. They're based on orbital maths, not on whether your species is having a good century. So early Homo sapiens in Africa, Neanderthals in Europe, and Denisovans in Asia are all trying to build stable lives on top of a system that keeps sliding under their feet every few thousand years. They don't know words like Milankovitch cycles, but they live the consequences: shifting rainfall, moving animal ranges, expanding or shrinking ice. 200,000 years ago sits in one of those uneasy intervals. Ice sheets are significant, but not at their maximum. Some regions are cold and harsh, others are a bit more forgiving. For Ice Age animals and northern human groups, that means one thing: life lived in the shadow of ice. Where those ice sheets sit, how far they reach, and what kind of land they create at their edges will define the possibilities for everything, from mammoths to Neanderthals. To see that side of the story clearly, you have to go north, up to the line where rock and soil give way to white. Ice at the edges, Europe and North America, under siege. Stand on a ridge in northern Europe 200,000 years ago and look north. The horizon doesn't end in distant hills. It ends in ice. The Fennoscandian ice sheet sprawls across Scandinavia and pushes south into what is now the Baltic region. Its surface is not smooth like a skating rink. It's fissured, ridged and dirty, with rock and dust it has scraped from the land beneath. The air above it is colder, often hazy with blown snow, even when the sky is clear elsewhere. In front of the ice lies a belt of raw ground. This is the periglacial zone, a no-man's land of frozen soil in winter, muddy thaw in summer, and constant freeze-thaw damage. Here, the upper layers of the ground heave and crack as ice lenses grow and melt. The vegetation is tough and low. Grasses, sedges, hardy shrubs, and dwarf willows cling to soils that are thin, stony, and frequently disturbed. Trees struggle, mostly appearing in sheltered pockets or farther from the ice. Animals in this belt are specialists. Woolly mammoths, or their close-step relatives, move in herds across open ground, using their tusks and trunks to push through snow and scrape at buried plants. Woolly rhinoceroses browse on shrubs and hardy herbs, their massive bodies built for cold and wind. Wild horses and steppe bison add more hooves to the constant trampling. Predators track these herds. Giant cave lions, wolves, and hyenas work the edges, watching for injured or young animals. In some regions, brown bears den in slopes above river valleys, emerging each year into a world that still smells of ice and dust. South of this harsh belt, the land softens into steppe and open woodland. Here, in Europe, Neanderthals have carved out their world. They use caves and rock shelters as bases, taking advantage of natural roofs in limestone cliffs and rocky hills. Between these refuges, they move through forests, river corridors, and open patches, hunting red deer, wild cattle, horses, and other mid-latitude game. Winters are long and cold, but not fully glacial at this moment. Snow falls, rivers freeze, and food is lean, but the land is not completely locked. Summers bring brief explosions of plant growth, insect swarms, and better hunting. To the west, the Atlantic sends storms rolling in, but its moderating influence doesn't reach far inland. To the east, the continent stretches into bigger, drier steppes, where winds lift dust from exposed soils and glacial outwash, building low-S blankets that will later make rich farmland. Cross the Atlantic in your mind and the pattern rhymes, though the details differ. In North America, large ice masses grip Canada and parts of the northern interior. Proto-Laurentide and Cordilleran ice complexes anchor themselves to shield rock and mountain chains. Glaciers crawl down valleys, grinding bedrock to powder and leaving U-shaped troughs in their wake. In front of the ice, familiar periglacial belts appear: tundra, steppe, bogs, and braided rivers fed by meltwater. Massive glacial lakes form where ice blocks drainage. Some of these lakes will one day unleash megafloods when their ice or sediment dams fail, but right now they sit in uneasy equilibrium. South of the ice margins, North America is a mosaic. Cold-tolerant forests of spruce and pine spread in places, while open grasslands hold herds of mammoths, mastodons, horses, camels, and giant ground sloths. Big cats, short-faced bears, dire wolves, and other predators stalk this crowded stage. But humans have not arrived here yet. The edges of the ice are not just lines on a map. They are moving fronts that creep, pause, and retreat as climate flickers. A valley that is safe for a few generations can be crushed under ice in later centuries. A river that once flowed freely can be dammed by advancing ice, turning into a lake. To any living creature, animal or human, the ice is both threat and signal. Come too close, and you face brutal cold, poor soils, and unpredictable floods from sudden melt. Stay just far enough away, and you can exploit the rich, disturbed ground and the animals that graze it. This is the northern half of Earth at 200,000 years ago, a world under siege from slow-moving ice, with life clinging to and even thriving in the narrow bands in front of it. But the story of our species doesn't begin in those frozen margins. While ice is grinding Europe and North America, a very different drama is unfolding much farther south, in a continent that keeps flipping its own switches of wet and dry, green and brown. To see how we enter this picture, you have to drop down into Africa, where unstable lakes, shifting grasslands, and on-off deserts are quietly shaping the cradle of early Homo sapiens. Africa, the shifting cradle of early Homo sapiens. 200,000 years ago, Africa isn't one simple savanna backdrop. It's a continent on shuffle mode. Rain belts slide north and south. Lakes swell, then shrink. Grasslands and woodlands trade places, sometimes in just a few hundred or thousand years. In East Africa, the Rift Valley is a string of scars and basins running through the landscape. Some of those basins hold deep blue lakes. Others are salt pans or dry floors, cracked under the sun. During wetter pulses, lakes can grow huge, linking into chains of inland seas. Their shores become absolute magnets for life. Papyrus swamps ring the edges. Fish crowd the shallows. Hippos and crocodiles patrol deeper water. On nearby hills and plains, antelope, zebra and buffalo move through fresh grass, watched by lions and hyenas. Wetter phases paint East Africa in richer greens. Rivers spread out and gallery forests hug their banks. Woodlands speckle the slopes and open savanna stretches between them. Then the dial flips. When rainfall pulls back, lakes drop or vanish. Exposed shorelines turn to mudflats, then dust. Grasslands thin out. Scrubby, drought-tolerant plants take over. For early Homo sapiens and their relatives, this boom-bust pattern is the soundtrack of life. They don't live in one timeless Lion King savanna. They move through a design that keeps changing. Wetlands one generation, more open grass and thorn scrub the next. Stone tools reflect that flexibility. In some places, people make Middle Stone Age points and blades that can be used as spear tips, knives or scrapers. They gather stone from exposed outcrops, riverbeds and eroding slopes, then carry or trade it along their routes. Around lakes and coasts, they crush shellfish, fish and hunt water birds. On drier plains, they target antelope, zebra, maybe even young hippos near shrinking pools. They also start playing with ideas we'd recognise as modern human behaviour. Pigments like red ochre appear at some sites, not for survival, but for marking skin, objects or stone. Tools get more standardised in shape. There are hints of long-distance raw material movement suggesting larger social networks. Genetically, Africa at this time is a maze of semi-connected populations. Different groups of early Homo sapiens and closely related humans live in various regions. East Africa's rift valleys, southern Africa's coasts and caves, central African forests, and northern fringes near the Sahara. Sometimes climate opens corridors between them, letting genes and ideas flow. Sometimes deserts and dense forests block movement, isolating groups for long stretches. North of the rift, the Sahara is another giant switch in the system. In its driest moods, it's a smoky yellow wall of dunes, gravel plains, and hyper-arid basins. Crossing it is nearly impossible without rare, well-placed water sources. In wetter phases, scattered lakes and rivers appear. Grasslands and scattered trees spread into what is now barren desert. When that happens, animals, and occasionally humans, can move between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean belt, the Levant and Arabia. These green windows may be when some early expansions of Homo sapiens into Eurasia happen. Not always successful, not always permanent, but real. When the Sahara dries again, those corridors slam shut. To live in this Africa is to read moods. Cloud build-ups in the distance, the colour of distant hills, the fullness of a lake compared to elders' stories. If a group misjudges arriving at a water source that has dried or sticking to a valley that's tipping toward long-term drought, the cost is brutal. So people hedge their bets, maintaining wide mental maps, kin ties in multiple regions, and flexible strategies for food. Africa at 200,000 years ago is not just where we came from. It's an engine that keeps testing us, remixing landscapes to see which humans can adapt fast enough. While Homo sapiens are learning to survive this climate roulette in Africa, another kind of human has already locked down its niche in colder lands far to the north. In Ice Age Europe, Neanderthals are not stumbling brutes. They are experts in a hard world. Neanderthal Europe, a different kind of human world. Slide back to Europe 200,000 years ago, and you enter Neanderthal country. The stereotype is wrong. Not cavemen dragging clubs, but a population tuned to the cold edges of an unstable continent. The land is a patchwork of biomes laid out in bands. Closest to the big ice, tundra and steppe dominate, low plants, permafrost, wind-scoured hills. Further south, a mosaic appears, open woodland, patches of dense forest, wide river valleys, and upland plateaus. Neanderthals occupy this zone between brutal ice and milder climates. They favour limestone regions where caves and rock shelters are common. Those natural hollows give them roof spaces that stay a bit warmer in winter and cooler in summer. Inside a Neanderthal shelter, you'd find hearths, burned bone, stone flakes, and tools. Their toolkit is Middle Paleolithic, Mousterian-style flakes, scrapers, points, stone cores carefully shaped so flakes can be knocked off in planned sequences, not random banging, planned geometry. In open country, Neanderthals hunt large herbivores that shape the landscape: red deer and fallow deer in forests and mixed terrain, wild cattle and aurochs in open areas and river meadows, horses on steppe-like plains, sometimes even straight-tusked elephants or rhinoceroses when the odds are right. They likely hunt cooperatively. Picture a group using terrain to their advantage, driving animals toward a ravine, a river bend, or a cliff, stunning or wounding from up close with thrusting spears, then finishing the kill together. Weather is a constant opponent. Winters bring deep cold, snow cover, and limited plant foods. Summers can be brief but intense, with bursts of growth in grasses and shrubs, insect swarms, and better hunting. Neanderthals track these cycles. They know which valleys hold game in bad winters, which south-facing slopes warm first in spring, which caves stay dry in heavy rains. Their bodies show the adaptation story. Stocky builds, strong muscles, and barrel chests help conserve heat. Their limbs are relatively short, reducing surface area that loses warmth. This is a design that makes sense when your home range includes snow, ice-edged rivers, and cold winds for much of the year. Socially, groups are probably small and kin-based. A few families travelling and hunting together. Camps where tools are sharpened, meat is butchered, hides are worked, and children learn by doing. There is evidence Neanderthals cared for injured or elderly members, including individuals who lived for years with serious impairments. That implies cooperation, memory, and emotional bonds, not just survival instinct. They also leave signs of symbolic behaviour, though not as densely as later Homo sapiens. Pigments like ochre turn up at some sites. There are possible ornaments and modified bones that might have been used for display or ritual. In some caves, careful arrangements of stalagmites and bones hint at structured activities beyond simple living. At night, imagine the soundscape. Wind outside, sometimes carrying the howl of wolves or the distant roar of a cave lion. Inside, the crackle of a fire, shadows from flames dancing on rough walls. Around the hearth, Neanderthals share food and information, where the herds move, where a predator has been seen. Which valley felt different this year? Less snow, more meltwater, fewer animals. They are not alone on the continent forever. At various times, Homo sapiens populations from Africa will enter these same environments, bringing different tools, symbols, and strategies. But at 200,000 years ago, Neanderthals are the main human presence in Europe, with a deep, inherited understanding of cold forests, steppes, and rocky refuges. To the east, beyond Europe's last forests and across massive plains and mountain chains, another caste of humans occupies Asia. They are even more mysterious because most of what we know about them comes from fragments: a finger bone, a tooth, a bit of DNA. Asia's hidden humans, Denisovans, and other ghost lineages. Asia, at 200,000 years ago, is huge, varied, and crowded with life, and more than one kind of human. From frozen Siberian river valleys to dense Southeast Asian forests and high mountain plateaus, different hominin lineages are carving out their niches. In western Siberia, caves like Denisova sit in forested foothills above rivers. To a passing hunter, they're just good shelters, dry floors, solid roofs, protection from wind. Inside one of these caves, much later, modern scientists will find a tiny finger bone and a tooth. From them, they'll recover DNA that doesn't match known Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. They'll call this group Denisovans. 200,000 years ago, nobody has names for any of this. But those people are there, moving through mixed forests and river valleys, hunting, gathering, and perhaps trading or overlapping with Neanderthals to the west. Genetic evidence tells us Denisovans weren't confined to one cave. They likely spread across large parts of Central and Eastern Asia. Some populations adapted to high-altitude conditions that would crush unprepared lungs. Think Tibetan plateau levels of thin air. Others probably lived in lower, warmer forests and along major river systems. Their world includes mammoths and woolly rhinos in the north, shifting steppes and taiga, and further south, forests rich with deer, pigs, monkeys, and edible plants. Farther down the map, Southeast Asia and the islands beyond are home to even stranger stories. On what are now Indonesian islands, earlier human species, like Homo erectus, have already spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to local conditions. On Flores, a small-bodied hominin, later nicknamed the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, will persist until long after 200,000 years ago, in an island ecosystem full of dwarf elephants and giant storks. In the Philippines and other parts of island Southeast Asia, fragmentary fossils hint at yet more human variants like Homo luzonensis, living on isolated islands with their own mini-evolution experiments. These island worlds are separated by deep channels, even with lower sea levels. They act as genetic and ecological test tubes. Meanwhile, mainland East Asia holds its own set of archaic humans. Caves in China, for example, preserve skulls and bones that don't fit neatly into Neanderthal or Homo sapiens boxes. Some look like mosaics, a bit archaic here, a bit modern there. They might represent populations that contributed to the ancestry of later East Asians, or side branches that left little trace. The climate across Asia is as diverse as its humans. In the north, cold steppes, boreal forests, and permafrost ground mirror Europe and Siberia. In Central Asia, huge plateaus and deserts swing between freezing winters and scorching summers. In the south and east, monsoon systems pump seasonal rains into forests, rivers, and coasts. For Denisovans and other archaic groups, this means a life of constant calibration. Follow herds along river corridors when times are good. Retreat into refuges, caves, sheltered valleys, forest pockets, when climates swing cold or dry. Genetic traces show that these hidden humans didn't stay fully separate from others. Later, Homo sapiens groups migrating into Asia will meet and mix with Denisovans. Some of their genes survive today in modern populations, especially in parts of Melanesia, Australia, and Asia, including adaptations for high altitude and immune responses. So 200,000 years ago, Asia is not just Neanderthal's East Edition or a blank space waiting for modern humans. It's a crowded, layered theatre with multiple human actors, Neanderthal-like groups in the West, Denisovans in forests and mountains, other archaic humans in China and Southeast Asia, long-lived island lineages evolving their own shapes and sizes. Later, Homo sapiens will enter this stage, and the family tree will tangle even more. But even now, before that big meeting, the core truth is already in place. Earth, at 200,000 years ago, isn't our planet without us. It's a world where many kinds of humans share space with mammoths, rhinos, giant marsupials, and untamed continents. Each lineage testing different solutions to the same problem: how to survive on a planet that can't stop changing. To really feel how wild that moment is, you have to see them all together. The full, crowded human family tree coexisting in a single slice of time, long before history ever picked a main character, when many humans shared one planet. When you look at Earth 200,000 years ago, you're not seeing our species alone in a rougher world. You're looking at a planet where several kinds of humans are sharing the same geological moment. In Africa, early Homo sapiens populations are scattered in different regions: East African rift valleys, southern African coasts, maybe pockets in central and northern zones. They don't all look the same, and they're not one single, unified group. Think clusters of related populations with slightly different faces, tool styles, and habits. In Europe and Western Asia, Neanderthals dominate. They've already been there for hundreds of thousands of years, riding earlier climate swings and surviving harsher glacial periods. They are descendants of earlier Eurasian hominins, shaped physically and culturally by cold forests, rocky hills, and big Ice Age herbivores. Farther east, Denisovans and other archaic lineages occupy parts of Central and Eastern Asia. We don't know their names or languages, but we know some of their genes are still in us. Later, Homo sapiens will carry Denisovan DNA into modern populations, especially in Oceania and parts of Asia. On islands Southeast Asia and maybe other isolated spots, smaller-bodied hominins like Homo floresiensis and Homo luzernensis are doing their own thing. They're using stone tools, hunting local fauna, and navigating island landscapes long before any modern humans show up there. So at any given moment, Earth holds early Homo sapiens in Africa, Neanderthals in Europe and parts of Western Asia, Denisovans and other archaics in Central Eastern Asia and highlands, island specialists on places like Flores, possibly more ghost lineages we still haven't identified. This isn't a neat family tree with one clean trunk. It's more like a thorny bush. Branches sprout, split, and sometimes reconnect. Groups separate during harsh, isolating climate, then reconnect during wetter, warmer phases when deserts shrink and forests thin. When they meet, they don't just fight or ignore each other. They sometimes have children together. We know this because modern DNA holds fingerprints of those encounters. Neanderthal ancestry is present in most people outside sub-Saharan Africa. Denisovan ancestry shows up strongly in Melanesia, in indigenous Australians, and at lower levels in parts of Asia. Those are the echoes of real individuals who met, formed families, and lived in mixed communities, even if we'll never know their names. Back then, none of these groups thought in terms of species labels. They just knew, here are other people from over that mountain or across that valley who look a bit different and talk in a slightly unfamiliar way. Sometimes they're rivals, sometimes trading partners, sometimes strangers who become kin. Culture adds more layers. Neanderthals developed their own ways of making tools, organizing space in caves, and treating their dead. Early Homo sapiens in Africa experiment with pigments, beads, and more complex hunting and gathering strategies. Other archaics in Asia might have their own traditions that we only glimpse through weird tool types and fragmentary bones. Every group is running the same survival software: get food, stay warm, keep kids alive, but their interfaces differ. Different clothes, shelters, hunting tactics, rituals, and stories tuned to local climates and animals. The craziest part, this is all happening long before farming, cities, or written history. The human family is already complex before the inventions we usually treat as the start of real civilization. If you could walk across the old world then, you wouldn't see one rising star species dominating everything. You'd pass through overlapping human zones like different servers on the same network. Neanderthal territory here, Denisovan territory there, early Homo sapiens patches in Africa, and unknown lineages holding down corners of Asia. And all of these humans, whatever we call them, share one constraint. They live in a world ruled by big animals and big climate swings. To understand how they moved, met, and sometimes mixed, you have to follow the real rulers of the landscape, the megafauna highways that connect everything. Megafauna highways, giant animals on the move. Before there were highways and shipping lanes, there were animal corridors. If you want to see how Earth was wired 200,000 years ago, you follow the giants. Across Eurasia, there's a loose belt of open ground stretching from Western Europe across the steppe zones of Russia and Central Asia into Mongolia and beyond. It changes shape with climate cycles, but it never fully disappears. This is the main street for mammoths, woolly rhinos, wild horses, bison, and giant deer. These animals don't just walk randomly. They follow seasonal routes between winter and summer ranges, or between wet season and dry season grazing. Their paths track river valleys, passes through mountain ranges, coastlines, and low saddles between basins. Imagine a mammoth herd in central Eurasia. In colder phases, they push south into slightly milder steppes and open woodlands. In slightly warmer intervals, they stretch their range farther north, following the retreating snow and the fresh growth that comes with it. Behind and around them, other species plug into the same system. Horses move in fast, nervous bands, grazing grasses trimmed short. Steppe bison spread out where the forage is thicker, using their massive heads to sweep snow off the plants in winter. In forest steppe zones, moose and red deer browse higher vegetation where trees and shrubs offer cover. Predators read these movements like maps. Wolves shadow herds at a distance, looking for the limping, the young, the separated. Big cats, like cave lions or tigers in some regions, stake out choke points. River crossings, narrow valleys, forest edges, hyenas, bears, and other scavengers clean up the aftermath of kills, turning carcasses back into nutrients for the system. Now layer humans onto this. Neanderthal groups in Europe and Western Asia learned to intercept herds along known routes. River bends, cliff edges, passes. They time their hunts to seasonal migrations, just as later humans would do with reindeer or caribou. In Central and Eastern Asia, Denisovans or other archaic humans almost certainly do something similar. These megafauna highways don't respect our modern borders. A route that runs across what we now call Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan is one continuous landscape for animals. Where climate allows, it connects into corridors that lead toward the Levant, Iran, and even down into parts of Arabia in wetter phases. Farther south, in Africa, animal networks look different, but follow the same logic. Herds of antelope, zebra, buffalo, and giraffe track rainfall patterns across savannas. In wetter times, migrations can stretch between regions that are now separated by harsher habitats. Elephants act as engineers, knocking down trees, opening pathways, and digging for water in dry riverbeds. These movements matter for humans in two ways. First, their food. If you know where herds will be when grass greens up or waterholes shrink, you have a plan for the season. If you misread the timing and arrive when the animals are already gone, you're in trouble. Second, their roads. If a big mammal can repeatedly cross a landscape, there's probably at least some water and forage along the way. Human groups learn to follow in their wake, not shoulder to shoulder with them, but using the same corridors, resting at the same rivers, scanning the same horizons. Even in continents without humans yet, like the Americas and Sahul, Australia, New Guinea, megafauna highways are drawing lines on the map. In North and South America, camels, horses, giant sloths, mastodons and big cats weave routes through plains, mountain passes and forest edges. In Sahul, giant kangaroos, marsupial lions and thunderbirds create their own trails between water sources and grazing grounds. Later, when humans finally reach those continents, they'll plug into these pre-existing networks. They'll use the paths giants made to hunt them, to travel, and to explore. At 200,000 years ago, though, the big picture is this. Megafauna highways connect regions that look separate on a flat map. They link Africa to Eurasia through green corridors, knit Eurasian steppes into one vast zone, and pre-wire the Americas and Sahel for future arrivals. But the most powerful switch that controls which highways are open or closed in the old world isn't a mountain chain or an ocean. It's a continent-sized mood swing just north of the tropics, a region that can flip from deadly desert to green artery and back again. Africa's on-off green switch, Sahara, rift lakes and grasslands. Put your finger on the northern half of Africa and zoom out. What we call the Sahara looks like a giant lid sitting between the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan regions. 200,000 years ago, that lid is not locked in one position. It's a massive climate switch. The key player is the African monsoon system. When orbital cycles line up to give the northern hemisphere stronger summer sunlight, land heats harder. Hot land pulls in more moist air from the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Result, the monsoon pushes farther north, dragging rainfall deep into what is now desert. In those green Sahara phases, huge belts of the region transform. Sand seas shrink, grasslands, savannas, and even patches of woodland spread across basins and plateaus. Seasonal and permanent lakes appear in depressions. Rivers run where only dry wadis exist today. Imagine standing in central Sahara during one of these greener pulses. Instead of endless dunes, you see rolling grasslands, scattered acacia trees, maybe low hills with scrub. Herds of antelope, perhaps even hippos and crocodiles in the larger lakes, occupy what is now a hyper-arid zone. For animals, these green phases are open invitations. Gazelle, antelope and other grazers flow in from both north and south. Predators follow. Bird migrations tighten around new wetlands. The Sahara stops being a wall and becomes a bridge between North Africa and sub-Saharan regions. For humans, the stakes are even higher. During dry Sahara phases, movement between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean belt is severely limited. Crossing requires rare oases, long treks, and massive risk. Populations on either side can drift apart genetically and culturally, separated by thousands of kilometers of hostile ground. When the Sahara greens, those barriers loosen. Early Homo sapiens living in sub-Saharan Africa gain new northward routes. They can follow rivers and lakes into territories that were previously locked away. Hunting and foraging grounds expand dramatically. It also works the other way. Human groups already living on the northern fringes, maybe in the Nile Valley, North African coasts, or the Levant, can move southward along these same corridors. Gene flow and cultural exchange become possible again after long pauses. While the Sahara is flipping modes, East African rift lakes are running their own boom-bust cycle. When rains are strong, lakes like those in the Rift Valley climb higher. Shorelines move upslope, forming long, productive edges where fish, birds, and grazing animals concentrate. When climate tips drier, lakes shrink, leaving behind mudflats, then saline pans, and dusty basins. These pulses don't always sync perfectly with the Sahara's mood. Sometimes the rift is relatively wet, while the Sahara leans dry, or vice versa. That creates complicated patterns of refugees and corridors. Early Homo sapiens and related populations navigate this as best they can. They cluster around lake margins and river valleys in good times. When water sources fail, they shift to more reliable refuges, highlands, coasts, or spring-fed oases, carrying with them knowledge of where the land last supported life. Grasslands in East and Southern Africa respond to these broad patterns, expanding and contracting as rainfall zones drift. Mixed savanna woodland mosaics stretch or fragment, changing which animals dominate and where humans can easily move. All of this means Africa isn't just the birthplace in a static way. It's more like a treadmill under our evolutionary feet. Green corridors open northward, humans and animals move, deserts return, connections snap, lakes swell and shrink, populations grow, then crash or disperse. Over tens of thousands of years, these repeated on-off patterns likely helped create the genetic and cultural diversity within early Homo sapiens, mixing some groups at times, isolating others at different moments. And crucially, when the Sahara flips to green and remains that way for long enough, it doesn't just connect Africa to itself, it plugs Africa into the wider Old World. At those moments, the continent's shifting human story spills out into new territories through narrow corridors in Arabia and the Levant that act as the first real exit ramps from the cradle. Next, we follow those exits into the gateway lands of Southwest Asia, where Africa's humans first step onto the broader Eurasian stage. Arabia and the Levant, gateways between Africa and Eurasia. If Africa is the engine, Arabia and the Levant are the doors. They decide when that engine connects to the rest of the Old World and when it doesn't. 200,000 years ago, this whole zone is on the edge of two major systems, African monsoons pushing from the south and west, and Mediterranean westerlies pushing from the north and west. Where those meet, stall, or shift decides whether this region is a bridge or a brick wall. Start with the Levant, the strip that includes modern Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Western Jordan, and Syria. It's a narrow corridor squeezed between Mediterranean Sea and desert interior. In wetter phases, this corridor is green and varied. Oak and pine woodlands on uplands, patchy forests and scrub-in hills, river valleys with gallery forests and wetlands, coastal plains with grass and low dunes. In those times, the Levant is a magnet. Gazelles, wild cattle, fallow deer, wild boar, and other game animals crowd into its habitats. Lakes and springs supply water, even when surrounding regions dry. For hominins, this makes the Levant a classic refuge and meeting place. Neanderthals can push south into it from Europe and Western Asia. Early Homo sapiens can push north from Africa when the Sahara and Sinai routes are passable. Who's there at any given moment depends on the larger climate phase. Fossil and archaeological evidence suggests that at different times, both Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens occupy this strip. Sometimes it's Neanderthal country. Sometimes early modern humans move in. There may even be periods of overlap and contact. Shift southeast and you hit Arabia. Much larger, much harsher, but not always the dry expanse we picture today. Most of the time, in these glacial leaning conditions, Arabia is dominated by desert and semi-desert. Rocky plateaus, gravel plains and dune fields stretch across huge distances. Rainfall is low and highly variable. But orbital and monsoon cycles mean Arabia has windows of opportunity. When African and Indian Ocean monsoon systems strengthen and push farther north, rain can penetrate deep into the peninsula. Water fills ancient basins and depressions, forming lakes. Fossil river networks, now dry channels traced from space, once carried seasonal or perennial flow across what's now desert. For short intervals, in geologic terms, Arabia transforms. Scattered lakes host hippos, crocodiles, fish, and waterbirds. Grasslands and light woodlands appear around them, creating islands of productivity in a wider, dry matrix. These oases are linked by corridors of slightly wetter land, forming stepping stones from Africa into Eurasia. It's during these greener phases that early Homo sapiens can move out of northeastern Africa, across the Sinai or southern Red Sea routes, and into Arabia. They follow the same logic they use in Africa: stick close to water, use lake shores and river valleys as base camps, hunt grazers and browsers drawn to these resources. When climate tips back toward drier, those same routes can become deadly. Lakes shrink or vanish. Grasslands retreat to tiny pockets. Wind scours expose surfaces, building dunes and erasing shallow channels. Human groups that made it into Arabia during a good window can respond in a few ways. Retreat back toward more stable zones, Levant, Nile, or East African valleys. Adapt to patchy, oasis-based life with longer distances between resources. Or perish if they misjudge the speed and extent of drying. Over tens of thousands of years, Arabia and the Levant repeatedly flip roles. Sometimes they are thoroughfares, carrying animals and humans between continents. Sometimes they are cul-de-sacs, trapping populations until climate changes again. These gateway lands are also cultural mixing boards. When different human groups pass through or settle here in different phases, they leave tool styles, habits, and genes behind. Later arrivals may find stone sources already quarried, caves already lived in, and hunting grounds already structured by earlier use. This back and forth movement means that any out of Africa story is not a single smooth wave. It's multiple pulses, some of which fail, some of which stall, and some of which keep going east. Follow the paths that succeed, and they eventually feed into South Asia, a region ruled by monsoon cycles long before any city appears. South Asia under monsoon rule, rivers, forests, and coastal plains. At 200,000 years ago, the Indian subcontinent isn't a land of cities, temples, or fields. It's a giant climate amplifier. The main character here is the monsoon. Even in glacial-leaning times, monsoon winds still flip seasonally, dragging moisture from the ocean onto hot land, then reversing. But the strength, reach, and timing of those monsoons shift with global climate and orbital cycles. In stronger monsoon phases, South Asia greens up dramatically. The western coast facing the Arabian Sea turns lush, with dense forests climbing the windward sides of mountain ranges. The Ganges-Brahmaputra basin in the north becomes a vast network of rivers, floodplains, and wetlands. Eastern regions, like what's now northeast India and Bangladesh, turn into some of the wettest, most biologically rich areas on the planet. In weaker monsoon phases, rains pull back. Grasslands and open scrubs spread in parts of central and western India. Some forests retreat into refuges on hills and along rivers. Semi-arid zones expand, but rarely to full desert over the whole subcontinent, because mountains and coastlines keep funneling some moisture inland. 200,000 years ago, humans are almost certainly present in some parts of this system, though we can't always see exactly who from this distance. Tool scatters and later fossil hints suggest archaic humans and possibly early waves of Homo sapiens move into and through South Asia following water and game. The landscape gives them options. Along the great northern rivers, people can exploit fish, turtles, water birds, and large herbivores drawn to floodplain grasses. Seasonal floods lay down silt on valley floors, then recede, creating moist ground where plants flourish. In central uplands and plateaus, mixed woodlands and grasslands hold deer, wild cattle, antelope, and pigs. Rock shelters in these regions offer dry living spaces and lookout points over surrounding terrain. In coastal belts, mangroves, estuaries, and nearshore waters provide shellfish, fish, and crustaceans. Lower sea levels at this time mean wide coastal plains, some now drowned, were available for foraging and movement. The monsoon dictates the rhythm of everything. Pre-monsoon heats up, rivers shrink, some streams become chains of pools, plants wilt. Humans and animals concentrate around reliable water sources. Then the rains arrive. Thunderstorms sweep in from the ocean. Rain hammers the land. Rivers swell and spread into floodplains. The first fresh green shoots appear days after the first big storms, and herbivores move quickly to take advantage. For human groups, this means planning around wet and dry seasons at a continental scale. You might use rock shelters in uplands during the wettest phase, when lowlands flood and insects are intense. Then move down onto dried floodplains when waters recede, feeding on stranded fish and fertile plant growth. Highlands and hill ranges, like the early forms of the Western Ghats and other chains, act as climate stabilizers and refuges. When lowlands swing toward drier conditions, hill forests can hold on to moisture longer, keeping streams running and edible plants available. In very wet phases, those same hills offer elevation and drainage, protecting camps from flood risks. South Asia's position also makes it a key connector. To the northwest, routes lead toward Iran, Central Asia, and eventually the Eurasian steppe. To the northeast, corridors point toward the eastern Himalaya and beyond into East Asia. To the southeast, lower sea levels make it easier to cross into what is now Myanmar and onward towards Southeast Asia. So whatever human lineages pass through, archaic groups, Denisovan-related populations, early waves of Homo sapiens, South Asia acts as both a habitat and a crossroads. Over long timescales, the monsoon's pushes and pullbacks likely create cycles of expansion and contraction for these groups. Wet phases allow wider spread and mixing. Drier phases isolate populations in pockets around reliable water and forest refuges. The net result: South Asia becomes a genetic and cultural blender, contributing threads that will reappear later in both West and East Eurasian populations. Follow those threads northeast and east, and you arrive in a region where the Ice Age personality is even more extreme, a place that flips between brutal mammoth steppe and deep shadowed forests. East Asia, from mammoth steppe to dense forests. East Asia, at 200,000 years ago, is a story of contrasts stacked on top of each other. Head north and you run into cold. Head south and you sink into forests and monsoon rains. Between those extremes, river systems and loess plateaus create shifting middle worlds. In the far north, Manchuria, northern China, Mongolia, and Siberia, the landscape echoes the Eurasian steppe you saw earlier. Open grasslands and steppes stretch across broad plains. In colder pulses, permafrost creeps south and tundra plants take over some zones. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, wild horses, and steppe bison or their relatives roam in herds, following seasonal grazing. Predators like big cats, wolves, and bears track them across river valleys and low mountain passes. Human occupants, Denisovans, Neanderthal-related groups, other archaics, move along the same pathways. They use caves in limestone and volcanic regions as base camps, with stone tools tuned to local raw materials, drop slightly south and west into northern China, and the famous Loess plateaus come into play. Wind has blown fine dust off glacial outwash plains and deserts for tens of thousands of years, stacking it into thick deposits. These Loess soils are soft to dig, fertile when moist, and prone to erosion when vegetation cover is thin. Vegetation here flips over time. In colder, drier phases, grass and shrub steppe dominates. In milder, wetter phases, these slopes can support open woodland or forest steppe mixes. Human groups in this region exploit river terraces, springs, and the edges of these Loess hills, hunting grazing animals, gathering plants, and using easily carved sediments for shelters or pits. Farther south, East Asia turns heavily wooded. Eastern China, Korea, and parts of Japan, linked at times via land connections when sea level is low, host temperate forests. Oak, maple, chestnut, and conifers share space, depending on elevation and latitude. These forests are rich in nuts, fruits, small game, deer, and wild pigs. Rivers flowing from inland mountains to the Pacific carve corridors through this green. In even warmer, more humid zones, southern China, parts of Southeast Asia, dense subtropical and tropical forests dominate. Here, tall trees knit into multi-layered canopies. Lianas, ferns, and undergrowth fill the gaps. Monsoon and convective storms deliver heavy rain. Monkeys, gibbons, deer, pigs, large birds, and a variety of smaller mammals share space with predators like leopards and tigers. Hominins in these environments must adapt to very different challenges than their steppe cousins. Visibility is limited by vegetation. Movement is slower and more vertical, using ridges, streams, and game trails. Hunting requires ambush and deep knowledge of animal behaviour in forest settings. Some archaic humans here may show anatomical traits hinting at long-term forest adaptation, though fossils are fragmentary and hard to interpret. Further south and east, lowering sea levels connect parts of East Asia more tightly to island Southeast Asia. Broader coastal plains stretch off what is now China and Vietnam. Shallower seas divide mainland from islands, sometimes exposing land bridges that allow animals, and eventually humans, to cross during the lowest sea level phases. In all of East Asia, climate keeps seesawing under the influence of global glacial cycles and regional monsoon dynamics. Colder, drier phases push steppe conditions farther south, weaken forests, and expand dust-producing zones. Wetter, milder phases let forests and mixed woodlands climb back, shrink the steppe, and bolster river systems. Human groups ride these changes. In cold intervals, populations may retreat into forest refuges in southern or coastal zones, caves in karst landscapes, or river valleys with buffered climates. In warmer, wetter periods, they expand into broader ranges, exploring Loess plateaus, interior basins, and northern plains. Somewhere in this shifting mix, early Homo sapiens will later arrive and meet Denisovans and other archaics. They'll exchange genes, compare toolkits, and slowly edge toward dominance. But at 200,000 years ago, this hasn't fully played out yet. East Asia is a shared space, a layered experiment in how different humans can live in everything, from mammoth country to monsoon forest. While all this unfolds across the gigantic Eurasian landmass, another continent-sized experiment is running in almost complete isolation. A world of giant marsupials, strange predators, and no humans at all. Yet, next we jump to Sahul, the combined Australia and New Guinea, to explore the lost age of giant marsupials before any human footprint touched their soil. Australia and New Guinea before people. the lost age of giant marsupials. 200,000 years ago, Australia and New Guinea aren't separate islands. They're welded together into one giant landmass we call Sahara, stretching from what is now Tasmania in the south to the mountains of New Guinea in the north. No humans, no fire stick farming, no tracks of bare feet along the beaches. Instead, the land is ruled by animals that look like someone re-rolled evolution's dice and went with marsupial DLC. In the interior, the climate leans dry. Broad plains and low hills carry open woodland, scrub and grasslands that respond to pulses of rain. Rivers are often intermittent. Some flow only after storms. Lakes expand and contract, leaving chains of waterholes behind when they shrink. Across this patchy environment, giant marsupials move like living tanks. Diprotodon, the classic mega-wombat, browses shrubs and low trees. It's not literally a wombat, but an enormous relative, broad head, heavy body, pillar-like legs. Picture something larger than a modern rhinoceros, wandering in family groups between water sources. Alongside it are giant short-faced kangaroos like Procoptodon, standing tall, with forward-facing eyes and powerful limbs. These aren't the hopping silhouettes you see on Australian road signs. They probably moved in big, controlled bounds, browsing leaves from shrubs and trees with grasping forelimbs. Sharing the plains and woodlands are beasts like Zygomaturus and other large, cow-sized diprotodontids, wading in wetlands and feeding on softer vegetation. Giant emu-like birds such as Genyornis, striding across open ground, plucking fruits and plants, nesting in colonies. Huge monitor lizards, later dubbed megalania, that act as apex terrestrial predators in some regions. In the forests and more rugged country, you get the apex nightmare, the marsupial lion, Thylacoleo carnifex. It's about the size of a big modern lion but built differently. Powerful forelimbs with semi-opposable thumbs and huge claws, massive jaw muscles, shearing teeth that function more like a guillotine than scissors. It probably ambushes prey from cover, dropping from trees or lunging from rocky outcrops, targeting big marsupials at waterholes or in thick scrub. New Guinea's northern regions, fused into Sahara, are wetter and more mountainous. Cloud forests wrap high ridges. Lower slopes carry dense tropical and subtropical vegetation. Smaller marsupials, monotremes, giant birds and reptiles live here, adapted to steep slopes, heavy rains and cooler mountaintop climates. Monotremes, egg-laying mammals like early forms of echidnas and platypus relatives, occupy rivers, burrows and forest floors, representing a very ancient mammal lineage still holding on. Fire exists, but only as a natural force. Lightning storms crossing dry plains and eucalypt woodlands ignite patches of vegetation. Hot, dry winds carry flames until fuel runs out. But there's no deliberate patterning of fire yet. No careful timing of low-temperature burns to encourage fresh grass or maintain open mosaics. That means some areas may carry heavier fuel loads, leading to occasional intense burns that reshape plant communities at large scales. Other zones may avoid fire for long stretches, allowing denser vegetation to build. Rivers and wetlands are lifelines through this variability. Where groundwater reaches the surface or rainfall collects, billabongs, swamps and chains of pools form. These support reeds, rushes and aquatic plants, along with frog choruses, turtles and fish. Giant marsupials visit to drink and feed. Predators lurk at the edges. Along coasts, lower sea level means wide continental shelves are exposed as plains and low plateaus. Mangroves and estuarine habitats sit further offshore than modern coastlines, fringing lagoons and river mouths that no human eye has yet seen. Inland dunes and sandy flats stretch where we now find shallow seas. Sahul, at this time, is one of the purest examples of pre-human megafauna dynamics. Herbivores shape vegetation by eating, trampling and dispersing seeds. Predators and scavengers structure populations from the top down. Plants modulate fire patterns through how they grow and die. Lightning, storms and long-term climate shifts are the main external drivers. There's no spear point stuck in a diprotodon rib. No charred egg shells from human-cooked Genyornis nests. Not yet. This is the baseline that later human arrivals will collide with, a fully functioning megafauna world that has never had to deal with an intelligent, tool-using super predator. And Sahul isn't the only continent running that kind of simulation. On the far side of the Pacific, another pair of landmasses, North and South America, are also in their pre-human megafauna era, filled with giants that have no idea what's coming. The Americas before any human footstep. At 200,000 years ago, the Americas are huge, empty of humans, and loud with animals. From Arctic tundra to Andean peaks, from temperate forest to Amazon rainforest and pampas grasslands, everything you see and hear is shaped by big mammals and their predators. But not a single stone spear or campfire story has appeared here yet. Start in the north. In what is now Alaska and parts of Siberia, sea level is low enough that a broad land bridge, Beringia, periodically emerges between Asia and North America. At this exact time, conditions may be too harsh, icy or dry for easy crossing, which is one reason humans aren't here yet. But animals make it across in various phases of the glacial cycles. Mammoths roam the Beringian steppes, grazing hardy grasses and sedges. Caribou, muskoxen, Arctic foxes and wolves join them in cold, wind-swept plains. Southward, as you move out of the harshest periglacial zones, conifer forests appear, spruce, fir and pine, stretching across what will later be Canada and the northern United States. In these forests live elk, wapiti, moose, deer, and forest-dwelling mammoths and mastodons. Black and brown bears, packs of wolves and large cats, including the American lion, patrol river corridors, forest edges and open meadows. Push farther south into the mid-continent and you hit some of the richest megafauna communities on Earth. The Central Plains and prairies hold herds of horses and camels, both native to the Americas at this time, along with bison ancestors, ground sloths and other grazers. These animals move between river valleys and seasonal water holes, grazing grasses and herbs, opening up the landscape with their feeding. Predators follow this living tide. Dire wolves, larger and more robust than modern wolves, hunt in groups. Short-faced bears, towering omnivores with long legs, intimidate almost everything around them. Saber-toothed cats like Smilodon are ambush specialists, targeting big herbivores in wooded or broken terrain. In western North America, mountain ranges create complex mosaics. High valleys and basins hold lakes and wetlands fed by snowmelt. Lower slopes and foothills transition between forest, scrub, and grasslands. Here, mountain-dwelling species, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, and various deer, mix with lowland megafauna at certain times of year. Farther south, Mexico and Central America are a blend of dry forests, savannas, cloud forests, and early tropical rainforests. Jaguars, smaller cats, tapirs, peccaries, and various monkeys occupy this zone, along with giant ground sloths and other large herbivores pushing up from South America. Narrow land bridges here are critical for southward and northward faunal exchange. Cross into South America and the cast changes again. On the Andean highlands, camelids like early llamas and alpacas graze cold puna grasslands. Glaciers cap high peaks. Below, valleys hold rivers, forests, and wetland patches. In lowland South America, the Amazon basin is already heavily forested, though its exact extent and density shift with glacial cycles. Gallery forests along rivers and moist areas hold diverse communities of plants, insects, birds, primates, and smaller mammals. giant ground sloths like Megatherium and Eremitherium roam some of these forests and adjacent open habitats, reaching massive sizes on rich plant diets. Across open grasslands and savannas, like the pampas of Argentina and nearby regions, other strange giants appear. Glyptodonts, enormous armoured mammals with domed shells and heavy tails. Toxodonts and other large herbivores that look vaguely like rhinos or hippos, but are unrelated. Native horses and camelids using these spaces for grazing and migration. Predators include saber-toothed cats, jaguars and smaller carnivores. Condors and other large scavenging birds circle overhead, cleaning up carcasses and redistributing nutrients. Fire again is present but strictly natural. Lightning ignites grasslands and dry forests, creating patchy burns. These fires help maintain mosaics of open and woody vegetation, influencing where grazers feed and where trees can grow. River systems across both continents are wild and unconstrained. The Mississippi, Amazon, Paraná, and countless others build deltas and floodplains according to climate and sediment supply, not levees or dams. Flooding spreads nutrients, resets vegetation, and creates oxbow lakes and wetlands that become hotspots for life. Without humans, the megafauna web plays out according to climate, competition, and chance. Some lineages are already vulnerable to shifts in temperature, rainfall, and habitat connectivity. Others are expanding, probing new niches as glaciers advance and retreat. This is the world humans will eventually walk into, a world that has never seen a coordinated, tool-using predator that can strategize beyond individual lifetimes. When that happens, much later than 200,000 years ago, the balance will tilt dramatically. But before we even talk about that future collision, there's another piece to understand: the shape of the continents themselves. Because all of these megafauna movements and human migrations only make sense if you grasp how different the actual map of Earth looked in this colder, lower sea level world. Sea levels and coastlines, a different map of Earth. Take a modern world map in your head and start lowering the sea level, not by a metre or two, but by tens of metres. That's what Earth looks like around 200,000 years ago. So much water is locked up in continental ice sheets and mounting glaciers that global sea level is significantly lower than today. The exact number changes as ice slowly advances and retreats, but we're firmly in shrunken oceans in large continents' territory. The first thing to vanish is the familiar shape of shorelines. Continental shelves, those shallow underwater platforms around the edges of continents, are mostly exposed as dry land. They become broad coastal plains, low plateaus, and gently rolling hills. Europe looks thicker. The North Sea basin is partly land, not fully flooded. Wide plains stretch between what will become Britain and mainland Europe during lower stands. The English Channel, as we know it, may exist only as a river valley or a network of channels draining northward. Around Southeast Asia, the effect is even more dramatic. The Sunda Shelf, now mostly underwater, emerges to connect what we call the Malay Peninsula, Borneo, Java, and Sumatra into one continuous extension of the Asian mainland. Instead of scattered islands, you have a single mega-peninsula jutting into the Western Pacific and Indian Oceans. Farther south, the Sahul Shelf emerges, tying Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania together into that large landmass we just visited. Between Sunda and Sahul lies a belt of deeper water channels, Wallacea, that stay at least partly wet even during low sea levels, keeping complete land connections from forming. Up in the far north, Beringia appears as a broad bridge between Siberia and Alaska during certain low points in the glacial cycle. It's not just a skinny strip, it's a vast, cold, grassy plain with rivers and wetlands, supporting mammoths, horses, and steppe fauna. Whether it's passable for humans at any specific time depends on climate severity, but as a geographic structure, it rewires the map. Closed or altered seas show up elsewhere too. The Mediterranean's coastline pulls back, exposing wider coastal plains in places like the Adriatic, the Aegean, and the Levant. Some narrow straits shrink or become land connections. Islands sit closer to one another or fuse with the mainland. Other basins, like parts of what we now call the Black Sea, may behave more like large, partly isolated lakes than open marine environments, depending on sea level and sill depths at different points in the cycles. These changes reshape climate and ecosystems. Exposed continental shelves alter how winds pick up moisture from the ocean and where storms release it. Shallower, smaller seas store and redistribute heat differently than deep, sprawling ones. Wide new coastal plains support grasslands, marshes and forests where we now see water. Rivers extend across these plains before finally reaching a more distant shoreline, often building huge deltas and estuaries far from their modern mouths. For animals, lower sea level creates new dispersal routes. Herds can move along continuous land from mainland Asia into what will be island Southeast Asia. Predators follow. Plants disperse across these plains via seeds, spores, and animal carriers. For humans, once they show up in the right places at the right times, these exposed shelves will become highways, hunting grounds, and eventually drowned memories. But at 200,000 years ago, the key point is simpler. The world's outline is not fixed. It's breathing. Ice volume up, seas down. Continents grow fat and spiky. Ice volume down, seas up. Coastlines retreat, shelves drown, and islands pop out of the flood. All of this is plugged into a single, shared system, the oceans. They don't just rise and fall, they circulate heat, shape storms, and help decide where deserts, forests, and ice margins land. If you really want to understand why the Stone Age Earth looked and felt the way it did, you have to follow the water. Next, we head into the oceans and ice themselves to track the currents, storm tracks, and colder seas that quietly ran the entire Stone Age climate show. Oceans and ice, currents, storm tracks, and a colder sea. To understand Stone Age Earth, you can't just stare at maps of land. The real engine is the water. 200,000 years ago, the oceans are colder overall. Big ice sheets sit on land in the north and south, chilling the air that blows off them and feeding constant meltwater into nearby seas. In the North Atlantic, the basic conveyor belt we know today is already there. Warm, salty surface waters drift northward. As they cool and get saltier, they sink and flow back south at depth. This slow circulation helps move heat from the tropics toward higher latitudes. But with more ice on land and lower sea levels, that conveyor runs under different conditions. Meltwater pulses from glaciers freshen parts of the surface ocean. Fresh water is lighter than salty water, so it can form a kind of lid that makes it harder for deep water to sink. When that happens, regional climates adjust. Some areas cool, storm tracks shift, and sea ice can spread farther in winter. Sea ice is a big player in this game. In polar and subpolar seas, winter ice extends over large areas, then retreats partway in summer. The ice surface reflects sunlight, helping keep those regions cold. At the edges, where ice meets open water, you get strong contrasts, which is where the atmosphere likes to spin up powerful storms. Picture the North Atlantic storm belt in this era. Deep, low-pressure systems roll along the boundary between cold polar air and milder mid-latitude air. They drag fronts across ocean and land, delivering snow, freezing rain, wind, and shifting bands of cloud. Those storms help decide where rain falls, how much snow piles up on glaciers, and how often coasts get hammered. In the Southern Ocean around Antarctica, a circumpolar current races around the continent. With more ice perched on Antarctica's landmass, the temperature contrast between ice sheet and ocean is even stronger. That sharp gradient feeds strong westerly winds, which whip up waves and help lock cold water around the pole. Farther toward the tropics, the big gyres still spin. In the North Pacific and North Atlantic, wind-driven currents loop in broad, clockwise tracks. In the South Pacific, South Atlantic and Indian Ocean, they circle the other way. These loops move warm water along western sides of basins, think early versions of the Kuroshio or Gulf Stream, and return cooler water along eastern margins. That shapes coastal climates. Some coasts get milder, wetter conditions. Others get cooler. Drier air pulled off upwelling zones. Along many western continental margins, cold, nutrient-rich water wells up from below when winds push surface water offshore. These upwelling regions are biological gold mines. Plankton blooms feed fish, which feed bigger predators: sharks, seabirds, seals, whales. Even in a colder sea, these hotspots are teeming. Humans who eventually reach such coasts will find ridiculous amounts of food there. But at 200,000 years ago, a lot of these riches are still untouched by any hominin hand. Storm tracks follow the temperature gradients set by oceans and ice. Over the North Atlantic and North Pacific, chains of low-pressure systems march eastward, bringing winter storms to Europe, Eastern Asia, and North America. Their exact paths depend on how far south cold air pushes and how warm nearby waters stay. When the ocean's heat transport weakens or shifts, it can move these storm belts. That means some regions get more snow and rain, feeding glaciers and lakes. Others get pushed toward dryness, expanding deserts and steppe. Tropical oceans play their own part. They're cooler than modern tropics, but still warm compared to the rest of the planet. Evaporation here is the source of moisture for monsoon systems and trade wind-driven rainfall. Changes in sea surface temperature patterns, like early versions of El Niño and La Niña type swings, can modulate where rain falls year to year. So even in a glacial-leaning world, people and animals on land feel the fingerprints of faraway seas. A shift in North Atlantic circulation might change winter severity in Europe. A tweak in tropical Indian Ocean temperatures can modulate African and South Asian monsoons. A change in Southern Ocean winds can alter how much carbon the ocean locks away, slowly nudging global temperatures. From a Stone Age perspective, nobody knows the physics. What they see are patterns. Winters that run longer than elders remember. Rains that come late 3 years in a row. Rivers that freeze deeper or thaw earlier. Behind those local changes, the oceans and ice sheets are quietly adjusting their own balance, setting the rules for where forests, steppes, deserts, and glaciers can exist. And while the water and ice handle the deep background, there's another system every human can't help but read: the sky above their heads. Because when you don't have written calendars or GPS, your only clock and compass live in the stars. Skies of the Stone Age, stars, seasons, and survival without maps. Look up at the night sky 200,000 years ago, and you'd recognize almost everything. The Milky Way still arcs overhead in a bright, hazy band. Most of the same stars and constellations are in place, because stellar motions are slow on these timescales. What's different is how we relate to them. There are no cities to drown out starlight, no street lamps, no neon, no aircraft. When the moon sets and clouds clear, the sky is dark. The Milky Way looks like spilled milk smeared across velvet. Faint stars modern urban dwellers will never see are obvious guides. For Neanderthals, Denisovans, early Homo sapiens, and other hominins, those stars are more than decoration. They're the only consistent ceiling over a world that won't sit still. In the tropics and subtropics, people notice which stars rise just before dawn at different times of year. A certain bright star or cluster might appear low in the eastern sky right before the monsoon usually starts. Another group might sink into the western twilight around the time dry season sets in. Over generations, those coincidences become knowledge. You know the rains are close when that pattern appears there at dawn. When those stars climb high at night, the river will soon flood. You don't need maths for that, just patient watching and storytelling. In higher latitudes, the slow circling of stars around a north or south celestial point is obvious. Neanderthals or early Homo sapiens in Europe can see certain stars never rising or setting, just skimming around the horizon. Even if they never define north, they can notice that those stars mark a reliable direction at night. Moon cycles are another key layer. If you're timing hunts, gatherings, or long-distance trips, full moons are useful. They brighten the landscape, making it harder for predators to sneak up and easier to travel or hunt at night. Dark new moon nights have the opposite mood. Risky, quiet, good for certain kinds of ambush or for staying close to shelter. Stone Age groups don't have printed calendars, but they have repeated experience. They can tie certain activities to the second full moon after the snow melts, or the time when the thin crescent hangs low at dusk and these insects start to sing. In some regions, they may track longer cycles too. The slow shift of where the sun rises and sets along the horizon over the year is an obvious signal. In winter, the sunrise and sunset points cluster nearer one end of the horizon sweep, and days are shorter. In summer, they shift to the other side, and days lengthen. Marking those points with stones, wooden posts, or simply memorable landmarks can help groups remember when to expect certain animal migrations, plant seasons, or river behaviour. We don't have written records from 200,000 years ago, but later prehistoric sites suggest this kind of sky-land linking goes way back. Alignments to solstices and equinoxes, or to particular star risings, show up in stone circles and earthworks thousands of years later. Those things probably didn't just appear from nowhere. They likely evolved from much older habits of watching the sky. Clouds and weather signs round out the picture. In a world without satellite forecasts, you learn to read the thickness and motion of clouds, the feel of wind shifts, the smell of rain. You tie those cues to stories. The big stack of clouds like mountains in the west means storms by dawn. When the wind turns sharp and smells of snow, you don't cross the pass. All of this sky reading is more than survival trivia. It shapes how people imagine the world. The Milky Way might become a river of souls, a path of animals, or a road taken by ancestors. Bright planets that move against the fixed stars stand out as special, unpredictable lights that don't follow the usual rules. Lightning storms, eclipses, comets, and meteor showers hit especially hard. A total eclipse could freak out any group that has built steady expectations about the sun. A bright meteor that leaves a long trail might become the centre of a story about fiery visitors or sky spears. None of this is science in our modern sense, but it is a systematic way of connecting patterns in the sky with events on Earth. By 200,000 years ago, across multiple continents and human lineages, that kind of pattern making is already in full flow. Different groups will give different meanings to the same stars, but they're all doing the same core thing, using the heavens as a stable reference against a changing ground. Because on Earth itself, ice advances and retreats, coasts flood and emerge, forests burn, grow back and migrate. Only the slow spin of the sky feels solid, and under that sky, in this glacial-leaning, multi-human, megafauna world, something is quietly being set up. The conditions that will one day let one branch of this tangled family explode into farmers, city builders, and space probe launches. The world before us. How this age set up everything to come. It's tempting to see 200,000 years ago as just way back then, a generic blurry Stone Age. But looked at closely, it's more like a launch pad. Start with the climate. The planet is locked into its glacial-interglacial rhythm, driven by orbital cycles and amplified by ice, oceans, and greenhouse gases. We're in a cooler phase with large ice sheets and lower seas, but the system is recognisably the same one that will later produce the relatively stable Holocene. That means the basic rules of our later world are already in place. Ice sheets grow and shrink. Sea levels rise and fall. Monsoons strengthen and weaken. Storm tracks wander with temperature contrasts. All the landscapes we've walked through, African rift valleys, green Sahara phases, Eurasian steppes, East Asian forests, Sahel's marsupial stage, pre-human Americas, are being sculpted by those rules. Onto that stage, evolution has already thrown a crowded human cast. Neanderthals own much of Europe and Western Asia's mid-latitudes. Denisovans and other archaics hold parts of Central and Eastern Asia, from forests to high plateaus. Island hominins in Southeast Asia experiment with small bodies and unique lifestyles. Early Homo sapiens populations flicker and spread within Africa's shifting patchwork, sometimes connecting, sometimes isolating. This isn't a story that starts with "we appear, everything else fades." For a long time, we are just one branch among many, clever, adaptable, but not yet dominant. At the same time, megafauna networks are wiring the continents. Giant herbivores and their predators shape vegetation, soil, and seed dispersal. Their highways connect regions, turn some zones into crossroads and others into dead ends. Those animal routes will become our roots once our populations grow and radiate. Sea level patterns are silently laying out future paths and traps. Exposed shelves like Sunda, Sahul, and Beringia are preparing to act as corridors when humans finally arrive at the right latitude and moment. Coastal plains are thriving worlds that will later drown as interglacial phases flood them, erasing whole chapters of human and animal history under shallow seas. Culturally and cognitively, the groundwork is also being laid. Even if we can't see direct evidence from exactly 200,000 years ago, later finds tell us that humans and their cousins learned to track complex seasonal patterns. They passed down knowledge of animal migrations, plant cycles, dangerous places, and safe refuges. They start using pigments, personal ornaments, and increasingly sophisticated tools. These behaviours don't pop out of nowhere at 50,000 or 10,000 years ago. They grow from deeper roots, roots likely reaching back into this earlier Stone Age world, where constant climate pressure rewards flexible minds and tight social bonds. So why does this matter to us now? Because the normal Earth we think we know, the Holocene, with its familiar coastlines and mild climate swings, is not the baseline. It's a lucky, unusually stable slice of this much longer, more chaotic system. Our species got its start, and most of its wiring, in the kind of world you've just walked through. A world of fluctuating lakes and green deserts. A world with multiple human types sharing continents. A world where ice could threaten from the horizon and megafauna ruled open ground. That environment selected for a creature that could see patterns, tell stories, plan ahead, and cooperate flexibly. It built us to survive uncertainty, not to assume stability. When we finally hit the Holocene's calmer climate, those Stone Age skills let us do something unprecedented. Stay put, farm, store surplus, stack generations of knowledge in the same place, and then, eventually, industrialize and rewrite the planet at high speed. But underneath all our cities, satellites, and streaming services, we're still that Stone Age brain carrying Stone Age instincts, shaped by a world much closer to mammoth steppe and shifting monsoons than to skyscrapers. So when you picture Earth 200,000 years ago, Don't think of it as a distant, irrelevant past. Think of it as the missing prequel, the rough, unstable training ground that forged the one species that could one day look back, reconstruct it, and then decide what to do with the fragile, accidental stability we inherited. Because the real twist is this: the planet that shaped us to survive chaos has now been handed to us in an unusually calm state. And what we do next will decide whether we stay within that safe window or kick ourselves back into a Stone Age level of instability, without the safety of being small and scattered anymore. If this journey changed how you see the Stone Age, hit like, drop a comment with the era you want to visit next, and subscribe so you don't miss the next Deep Time episode. When you're ready to keep travelling, click the video on your screen and step into another vanished world.